James, thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you, Jacob. Glad to be
Apparently,
here.
your first experience did not persuade you that you should avoid a return.
No, it did not.
So, James, this is a moment pregnant with meaning, possibly. Yesterday, the death of Norman Podhoretz, the longtime editor of Commentary magazine, was announced. And Podhoretz was, of course, a leading luminary in the neoconservative movement, which played such a powerful role starting in the late 1960s, and then in the 70s and 80s, in injecting the Republican Party with more of a crusading doctrine in foreign policy, particularly towards the Soviet Union. And Podhoretz, for example, was a prominent opponent of Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger's espousal of détente with the Soviet Union. And Podhoretz and other former Democratic intellectuals then aligned themselves behind Ronald Reagan, including most prominently former UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick. Now, Podhoretz also ended as a fervent supporter of none other than Donald J. Trump, who he saw as a pivotal and necessary figure in combating the anti-Americanism of the left. And that was Podhoretz's credo. Now we have Trump on the verge of war with Venezuela. Does he, in fact, embody many of the precepts that Podhoretz and others propounded? That for all his talk of America first, and for various figures arguing that Trump represents a return to isolationism, is Donald Trump, in fact, a neoconservative, someone who's on the verge of war with Venezuela and has been a stalwart supporter of the state of Israel?
Well, with most historical processes, right, there are changes and there are continuities. And I think the continuity between the traditional Republican Party neoconservatism and Trumpism is an emphasis on unilateralism, right, and the United States acting on its own to solve problems abroad, or what it perceives as problems, what they perceive as problems abroad. So, and both the Trumpism and neoconservatism shares a distaste for international institutions. Maybe neoconservatism might see a larger role for the United States abroad, but it still emphasizes unilateral action by the United States and perhaps some key allies abroad rather than working through international institutions. Obviously, famously, the Iraq War was not a NATO war. It was a coalition of the willing, right? And so, in that sense, you could see Trump's Venezuela policy as similar, it's in that strain of unilateralism, and that would connect it with the neoconservative foreign policy tradition. The difference is that there is less of an emphasis in Trumpian foreign policy on achieving democracy abroad or regime change. The Trump administration doesn't want Maduro around, so I guess you could say that the Venezuela situation is in continuity with that, but it doesn't seem as if the administration is thinking all that much about what it wants the next day. It's pushing Maduro, seeing what will happen, not showing its hand, and just putting pressure on the regime. It does not seem as intent as, say, the Bush administration was on the nation building in Venezuela. It's just kind of like it's trying to see what will happen.
Well, that's a good point, because Irving Kristol, for example, in the 1980s wrote an article, I think, in Counter, arguing that the United States should lessen or even withdraw from NATO because he saw these international organizations as impeding America's ability to act unilaterally. And that got into a big controversy with the military historian, Sir Michael Howard. I suppose that leads us ineluctably, as William F. Buckley Jr. would say, or might have said, to the Trump administration's promulgation of the new national security strategy. What is your take on this document that has occasioned so much furor, particularly in Europe, where the document prognosticates nothing less than civilizational erasure if Europe continues on its current path? What is your take?
Well, I don't think the document is as anti-Europe as maybe the European leadership has in the way that the European leadership's reaction would suggest. The document, at least on paper, commits the administration to strengthening Europe, or wishing for a stronger, more capable Europe that can be a more effective U.S. ally. Now, what is distressing the Europeans is that the Trump administration does not treat the NATO alliance, or the U.S. transatlantic relationship, as a sort of sacred institution. And in order to secure stronger defense commitments and more military spending on Europe's part, the Trump administration has used the tactic of threatening disengagement within Ukraine, and relying on threats to bring about more European commitment to the alliance, to shore up their end. So if you treat an alliance as sacred, you can't really use carrots or sticks, right? And the Trump administration is trying to use carrots and sticks on Europe, and it's having it is succeeding. The NATO member states committed to a 3% defense spending pledge, and higher than the traditional 2%. So it is having a salutary effect on the overall strength of the NATO alliance. The talk about civilizational erasure, might seem extreme or hyperbolic for a national security document. But on the other hand, Europe's economy is very stagnant. It is facing demographic implosion. It can't control illegal migration from the rest of the world.
But Europe has had waves of immigration in previous centuries where it has essentially reformed itself. So why is this today different than from the past?
Which centuries?
Well, I mean, you've had huge population shifts in Europe, whether it's from Eastern Europe or within Europe. So you see the immigration from much of the immigration has also taken place already from Algeria into France, for example.
Right. Well, I mean, usually these periods of mass immigration are periods of social and political instability.
They
right?
are.
So
they are.
I mean, they're not periods that are golden ages, right?
But
So
given
that's not the only issue, right?
Right.
That Europe faces. I mean, the economic and the demographic situation will make Europe less secure. It'll make it less able to, if they're not able to make their economy more dynamic, they won't be able to spend as much on defense, deter Russia, so on. So the current trajectory that Europe is on is not good for its long-term security, and the Trump administration is not really being all that hyperbolic as much as we'd seem in talking about, I think, civilizational.
Couldn't this, in a way, backfire on the Trump administration, though? Because if you have a stronger Europe, it's also going to be a more independent Europe, and it's going to be one that takes American sensitivities less into consideration in the future.
Yeah, well, that's always a problem with having with any alliance system, right? If you're the United States and you want to have strong partners that will help you, that will contribute to shared goals, you want them to be strong so that they can actually contribute. But if they're too strong, they might have they might have different goals. So that's a tension in any relationship, whether that's Europe or India or Japan. But it certainly isn't in the United States' interest to have allies who are dead weight, so to speak, and Europe working in the other direction, towards more capabilities, um, is I think is appropriate, even if the trade-off is more independence. But I think that tension has to be worked through, anyway, and it's not in Europe's interest, considering the integration of both the United States and Europe's defense establishments, to go too far out, right? I mean, most European air forces still depend on U.S. fighter jets, and U.S. signals intelligence, and so on. They're not really going to break away from U.S. Security goals, I think, in a meaningful way.
Let's return to this civilizational erasure question, because one thing that occurs to me, Vivek Ramaswamy has a op-ed in the New York Times today based on his new forthcoming book, Truths About America. And today in the Times, I presume drawing on his book, he posits that on the American right, there are really two visions of American identity. One is of heritage Americans, so-called, people who've been living here for a couple hundred years. And that vision is an exclusive one that is based on the idea of blood and soil nationalism, where you don't have birthright citizenship, and you have a much more restrictive view of what it means to be an American. The other view, as he posits it, is a more idealistic one, where, as Ronald Reagan said, anyone, whatever their accent, can come, travel, emigrate to America, and become an American. Do you think that this is a serious issue for the right and perhaps even America in coming years, this binary distinction?
Yeah, it's certainly a serious fracture within the conservative movement. Whether the United States is a creedal nation or a nation based on more tangible characteristics, blood, soil, and even further on, like more racial considerations. I don't think that historically U.S. identity has been either it's been creedal or it's been totally racialized. It's been a little bit of both, in the sense that there's American identity has relied from its beginning on a certain British sort of cultural core, right? I mean, we were founded as British colonies by people from England, Scotland, and Ireland, from the British Isles, and that has had a serious impact on the sort of core of American identity. But it's always been able to assimilate outsiders as well. So I don't think American identity can be defined in very rigid, racial or cultural terms. It's always been assimilated, but it has relied on a certain cultural background. Former Justice Antonin Scalia would often talk about, he was Italian, but he believed that American identity wouldn't retain any kind of cohesion if it forgot about its original sort of British background. So I don't think it says either side of the debate, as far as American identity goes, really gets the whole picture. I mean, American society has always been a bit of both. It can't retain its appeal to outsiders if it isn't one that's based in certain ideals that could be considered universal. But it also would give up a certain amount of social cohesion and distinctiveness if it relied purely on appeals to abstract concepts. So I don't think it's either or, and we risk becoming too exclusive or too inclusive if we define it simply as a binary debate.
Let's talk about another issue that the neoconservatives have been very concerned about, which is anti-Semitism in America. And there have been a number of op-eds written recently alleging that there is a substantial faction on the youth, the so-called Groypers, who embrace anti-Semitism. And Vice President J.D. Vance has been reluctant to speak out directly about this issue as well, which has further inflamed it. Do you think the hubbub surrounding this issue is merited? Is anti-Semitism becoming a calling card, a credential on elements of the right? Or is the issue being overdrawn? What's your take?
I think it is a pretty big problem among the right wing youth. It's certainly been inflamed by the war in Gaza, and it is.
So the war in Gaza has heightened the sense that
it's heightened. It's not the only cause of it, but. I think
of
it
Israel
has been,
as an imperialistic.
Yeah, I think the perception that Israel is driving American foreign policy is obviously huge ammunition to that kind of thinking. Not to say it's true, but certainly that the scenario in the Middle East can be sort of manipulated to create that impression. As you know, Roger had a piece a few weeks ago, in which he alleged that 30 to 40% of young Republican staffers were sort of in the Groyper camp. I've heard that is something of an exaggeration.
I mean, Dreyer did not actually conduct a systematic
study. He did not
study.
conduct a systematic study. He just heard someone else make that spec. And the person he heard it from, I don't think had conducted a systematic study either. So I don't think it's that high, but it's clearly a problem, on particularly on social media, and with the model of X, Twitter, that Elon Musk has created, definitely fans the flames of hateful kind of speech, and if the profit model on social media platforms like X is to just drive engagement ruthlessly day in and day out, then this sort of rhetoric takes on a life of its own.
Well, James, do you think that it will have a substantial effect on the Trump presidency itself, or is it a peripheral issue?
I think that when Vice President Vance, the criticism that he's received about not condemning it, that the fact that he hasn't sort of gone out of his way to condemn this, even though as far as the GOP voting base is concerned, I don't think it's a major constituency. It seems more overrepresented in online circles, and particularly youth online circles, and GOP primaries don't typically rely on the youth vote, even in the small, among more youthful conservatives. But so it seems to be that there's a sort of online overthinking in Vance's camp, that they're always thinking about a sort of a loud, a noisy minority online, how to play with them and their political mobilization. But I don't think that, as far as national GOP politics, that is a considerable enough body of opinion to sway rank and file GOP elected officials.
Well, James, it does seem that the economy is the big issue, and maybe that's something we'll discuss next time as the midterms come closer and closer. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.